I called my son on a Thursday morning in April. I had been sitting at the kitchen table for 2 hours before I made the call. The phone was right there in front of me the entire time. I would look at it and then look at the wall and then look at the phone again. I made coffee. I didn't drink. I watched a pigeon on the windowsill outside go about its business with an indifference to my situation that I found, in the moment, both irritating and instructive. Then I picked up the phone and called my son and told him I needed money to pay my rent. I am 70 years old. For 35 years, I was the principal of a public high school in Portland, Oregon. I want you to understand what that means in practical terms. It means I spent 35 years as the person that other people came to when things went wrong. Parents called me, teachers called me, the school board called me. When a situation was difficult, or a decision was hard, or someone needed to be told something they didn't want to hear, I was the person in the room who said it. I was not always right, but I was always the one responsible for deciding. I had never asked anyone for money in my life, not once. Not my parents, not a bank beyond a mortgage, not a friend, not a colleague. I had a strong and possibly unreasonable pride about this that I was aware of and did not particularly want to examine too closely. And on a Thursday morning in April 2024, I called my son Daniel and told him I was 2 weeks from not being able to pay my rent in Rio de Janeiro. He didn't make me feel worse about it than I already felt. That was the thing I was most afraid of, and it didn't happen. He said, "Dad, how much do you need?" That was all. "How much do you need?" I told him. He said he would transfer it by the end of the day. And then he said, "Dad, we need to talk about what's happening." And I said, I know we do. We have still not fully had that conversation. I am working up to it. My name is William Saunders. Everyone calls me Bill. I was born in 1954 in Eugene, Oregon, and I have spent almost my entire life in the Pacific Northwest, which is either a choice or a habit depending on how honest you're being. I went to the University of Oregon, became a teacher, became a vice principal at 34, became a principal at 41, and stayed a principal until I retired at 76. No, at 66. I am 70 now. I retired at 66. 4 years ago. The years are beginning to compress in a way I find slightly alarming. My wife Ellen died in 2020. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed in January, gone by September. 8 months from the first appointment to the end, which is either merciful or brutal depending on the day you're asking. She was 63 years old. She had been a pediatric nurse for 30 years, and she approached her own illness with the same calm, practical competence she brought to everything. Asking the right questions, understanding the answers, making the decisions that needed to be made without making more of them than necessary. She was the most organized person I have ever known. After she died, I found a folder in her desk labeled After, which contained her will, her insurance information, the passwords to every account we shared, a list of people to call and in what order, and a handwritten note to me and Daniel that I have read perhaps 100 times and that I will not describe here because some things are not for strangers, even strangers who are listening to you in good faith. I retired in the spring of 2021. The school had a ceremony. There were speeches. My assistant principal of 12 years said things about me that were generous and mostly accurate. I sat in the gym where I had sat for 35 years of assemblies and graduations and emergency meetings, and I thought, this room is the same room it has always been, and I am a completely different person from the one who walked into it the first time. The year after Ellen died and I retired was the longest year of my life, not the worst. The 8 months of her illness were worse, but the longest. The specific length of days when you have no structure and no one to come home to, and the house is very quiet in a way that a house is never quiet when it has been full of a person for 37 years. Daniel suggested the trip. He had been watching me for a year with the worried attention of a son who doesn't know what to do and has decided that suggesting things is better than doing nothing. He said, "Dad, go somewhere. Rent an apartment somewhere for a month. Just get out of Portland for a while." I looked at various places. I am not entirely sure how I landed on Rio de Janeiro specifically, except that I had a colleague who had visited years ago and described it as the most alive city she had ever been in. And alive was the thing I needed most in the winter of 2022. I arrived in February. The contrast with Portland in February, with the gray and the rain and the particular Pacific Northwest darkness that I had lived inside for 67 years, was so extreme that I stood outside the airport and laughed. Not from happiness exactly, but from the physical shock of it. The heat, the noise, the smell of the bay, the quality of the light. I laughed the way you laugh when something surprises you so completely that your body doesn't have another response available. I checked into a hotel in Ipanema and slept for 11 hours and woke up the next morning and walked to the beach and sat on the sand and watched the city exist at 7 in the morning and thought, Daniel was right. This was the right thing to do. I enrolled in a Portuguese class my second week. This was practical. I had no Portuguese and intended to be there for at least a month, but it was also something else. It was the first time since retirement that I had been a student rather than an administrator. The first time I had sat in a classroom not knowing things. I found it unexpectedly pleasurable. The not knowing. The specific humility of being a beginner at something when you have spent most of your life being the authority. The class met 3 mornings a week in a room above a language school in Leblon. There were 6 students, 2 British retirees, a German woman in her 40s, a young Japanese man on a work transfer, and me. The teacher was a patient, precise woman named Fernanda, who had the specific gift of making you feel the mistake was interesting rather than embarrassing. Beatriz came in on the 3rd week as a conversation partner, a local hired by the school to sit with students and practice spoken Portuguese. She was assigned to me because, Fernanda explained, I needed the most practice. She was 36 years old. She had grown up in Tijuca and had been in Rio her whole life, working in tourism, hotel coordination, tour logistics, the kind of work that requires a comprehensive knowledge of the city and the ability to manage people who don't know where they are. She spoke English well and Portuguese slowly with me, with the specific patience of someone who has chosen, as a professional matter, to be patient. We met 3 mornings a week for a month and talked about everything. She asked about Portland, about the school, about Ellen. I told her about Ellen early, in the way you tell people about the thing that explains everything else about you. And she received it with the quiet attentiveness of someone who understands that grief is not a detour from a conversation, but often the center of it. She told me about Rio, the real city, not the postcard, the neighborhood she grew up in, what it had been like in the 90s, how it had changed. Her family, her mother in Tijuca, 2 brothers, a niece she was clearly devoted to. She was not performing warmth. She was simply warm, in the straightforward way of a person who has not decided to manage the impression she makes. At the end of my 2nd month, I extended my stay. At the end of my 3rd month, I found an apartment in Ipanema and signed a lease. I called Daniel and told him I was staying in Rio. He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man processing information he had not prepared for. And then he asked, "Is there someone, Dad?" I said, "There's a woman I've been spending time with. It's not, I don't know what it is, but I'm not ready to leave." He said, "Okay, Dad, just be careful." I told him I was a 70-year-old retired school principal and I was always careful. He said, "That's not really what I meant." I said I knew that, and I promised to call every week. Beatriz came to the apartment for dinner 2 weeks after I moved in. She brought pastries from a bakery in Tijuca that her mother had been going to for 40 years. We ate on the small balcony with the city below us and talked until midnight, and when she left, I stood at the door for a moment after it closed and thought, I am not lonely right now. I have not been able to say that in 2 years. I want to tell you something about that feeling. Not lonely. It sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. After 2 years of a house that echoes and mornings with no reason to speak out loud, and evenings that are indistinguishable from each other, not lonely is the thing you would pay almost anything to maintain. I did not understand yet how literally true that was. Last year was the year I stopped counting. I had always been careful with money, not miserly. Ellen and I had traveled, had bought the house, had paid for Daniel's education without debt. But careful. I knew where every dollar went. I had a spreadsheet, updated monthly, that tracked income and expenses with the same precision I brought to school budgets. It was not exciting. It was how I had managed to retire with $420,000 after a career in public education. The spreadsheet went unused from about month 4. It didn't happen because Beatriz asked for things. She didn't. That is one of the things I keep returning to, trying to understand the shape of what happened. She did not ask for expensive dinners or gifts or vacations. When I suggested things, she often suggested something simpler. She had a quality of genuineness about money, an ease with having less of it, that I found, in contrast to my own careful relationship with it, almost appealing. Like she knew something I didn't about what actually mattered. What happened was that I wanted to give. After 2 years of a house that didn't need anything from me, that just sat there, requiring maintenance but not care, I had a surplus of the impulse to provide that had nowhere to go. And Rio gave it somewhere to go. Her mother needed a new refrigerator in May, $400. I bought it without being asked and told Beatriz after. Her reaction, the genuine, slightly embarrassed gratitude, made me feel useful in a way I had not felt since the last time a parent had come to me with a problem I could actually solve. Her younger brother was studying engineering and behind on his tuition in June. $1,800. Done. There were small things that added up. The niece's birthday, a medical appointment for her mother that the public system couldn't schedule for months, the taxi home on a rainy night when Beatriz had missed the last bus. None of these felt like money leaving. They felt like choices, like exactly the kind of choices I had the resources to make and the right reasons to make them. I upgraded the apartment in August, from the smaller unit I had rented initially to a larger one on the 8th floor with a proper ocean view. The rent difference was significant. I did not think about it for very long. We went to Gramado in September, a mountain town in the south of Brazil that Beatriz had always wanted to visit and had never been able to afford. A long weekend, a good hotel. She was happy in the way that people are happy when they get something they have wanted for a long time and had stopped expecting. It was worth every dollar, and I do not regret it. By the end of the first year, I had spent, in addition to rent and living costs, approximately $90,000 on things I would describe as generosity. Not transactions, generosity. That distinction mattered to me then. I have thought about it a great deal since. Marcus appeared in November of the first year. He was a friend of Beatriz's from her tourism work, mid-40s, well-dressed, the particular confidence of a man who moves through the world as if it is slightly smaller than he is. He had started a small company that organized adventure tourism in the interior of Brazil, guided trips to the Pantanal, the Amazon, Chapada Diamantina. Boutique, high-end, the kind of market that was growing as international travelers looked for Brazil beyond the beaches. He needed capital to buy 2 vehicles and upgrade the equipment for the upcoming season. He had a bank loan approved, but needed a co-investor to reach the full amount, $60,000. Return over 18 months at 14%. All documented. Beatriz mentioned it once, in passing, as something Marcus had brought up and that she wasn't sure what to make of. I spent 2 weeks thinking about it. I looked up the company. It had a website, reviews on travel platforms, photographs of actual trips with actual travelers. I asked Marcus for financial documentation. He provided it. I asked a Brazilian accountant I had been introduced to through the language school to look at the paperwork. She said it appeared legitimate. I wired $60,000 in January of the second year. For 6 months, everything was normal. Marcus sent brief quarterly updates, trips completed, bookings ahead, the business growing. Nothing dramatic. The kind of updates that feel like evidence of a real operation rather than a performance. Then in July, he asked for a second injection. The business was growing faster than anticipated. A larger operator had approached them about a partnership that required additional capital. The opportunity was time-sensitive. He needed $40,000. The return on both investments combined would come at the end of the original 18-month period. I sent the $40,000. I want to be honest about this decision. I was not purely rational. I was 69 years old, and I had a woman in my life who made me feel like a person who still mattered in the world, and that feeling was connected, in ways I had not fully examined, to my ability to be useful and generous. Marcus's business was part of the world around Beatriz. Investing in it felt like investing in the life I was building. 18 months came and went. The return did not arrive. I contacted Marcus. He responded once. A delay, a processing issue with the partnership agreement. 2 more weeks. Then his number stopped working. Then his email bounced. Then his website disappeared. I told Beatriz. She was, and this is the part I have spent the most time with, she was genuinely shocked. Or she performed shock well enough that I could not tell the difference. She called people. She went to his last known address. She came back and told me he was gone, and that she was sorry, and that she had not known this was who he was. I believe she didn't know. I have no evidence either way, and I have decided to believe she didn't know, because the alternative, that the entire 2 years was architecture, is something I cannot fully inhabit and still get out of bed in the morning. But I also understand that it doesn't matter. Whether she knew or not, the money is gone. $100,000 to Marcus, $90,000 in what I called generosity during the first year. Rent, travel, daily life for 2 years in a city that is not cheap. The apartment upgrade, Gramado. $420,000 over 2 years in Rio de Janeiro. When I added it up, the first time I had properly added it up, the first time I had opened anything resembling a spreadsheet in almost 2 years, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the number for a long time. I had $11,000 left. $11,000 is not nothing, but it is also not rent in Ipanema plus food plus utilities plus the medications I take for blood pressure and for the thing with my knee. It is about 2 months, maybe 3 if I was very careful, and at the end of those 3 months I would have nothing. I thought about going home. Portland in the abstract. The house I had sold before coming to Rio. I had sold it, which had been part of the $420,000, and which meant there was no house to go back to. Daniel's guest room. The specific quality of that, a 70-year-old man, former school principal, living in his son's guest room in Portland, sat in me like a stone. I thought about it for 2 hours. Then I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring, the way he always does, as if he had been expecting the call. I told him what had happened, all of it. The investment, Marcus, the money, how much was left, what I needed. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "How much do you need, Dad?" Not, "How could you?" Not, "I told you to be careful." Not, "What were you thinking?" Just, "How much do you need?" I told him. He said he'd transfer it by end of day. And then he said, "Dad, we need to talk about what's happening." And I said, I know we do. I am still in Rio. I moved out of the Ipanema apartment. I could not afford it, and I needed to not be there, in the rooms where 2 years had happened, looking at the view I had paid for. I have a smaller place now in Santa Teresa, cheaper, quieter, a neighborhood that doesn't know me. The landlord is a woman in her 60s who asks no questions and accepts the rent on time. Beatriz and I still speak, not often. The shape of things between us changed after Marcus, not because either of us said it had, but because some things change without being announced. She came by once in the first weeks after, with food she had cooked. We ate and talked, and it was almost normal. She left, and I sat alone and thought, this is what almost normal costs. Daniel is coming in August. He booked the flight without telling me, and then called to say he had booked it, which is his way of making a decision that he knows I might resist. He is going to come, and we are going to have the conversation we have been not having for 4 months. I am preparing myself for it. I spent 35 years being the person who had difficult conversations. It is a strange thing to be on the other side of one. I have $420,000 less than I came here with. I have a son who transferred money to my account without making me feel worse than I already felt. I have a smaller apartment in a quieter neighborhood. I have a morning routine, coffee, a walk through the streets of Santa Teresa, the Portuguese I have kept studying because there is no reason not to, that gives the days a shape. I think about the folder Ellen left, the one labeled After, the passwords and the insurance and the list of people to call. I think about the note inside it, which I have read 100 times and which I will not describe. I think about the fact that she prepared for everything, for the practical aftermath of her death, for the specific needs of the people she was leaving, and that somewhere in all that preparation, she trusted me to figure out what came after the after. I am still figuring it out. I am 70 years old, in a small apartment in Santa Teresa, with less money than I have had since I was 25, and a son who is flying here in August to have a conversation I have been avoiding. Ellen would not find this amusing, but she would understand it. She understood most things about me, including the ones I had not managed to understand about myself. That has to be enough to keep going on. Most days, it is.